Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where the H is optional, and we talk about the week's hottest legal topics, uncorked. Today, we are going to be talking, we have so much to discuss, but we are going to discuss the TikTok Supreme Court decision. It is going away. We're going to say why, what the background is, and give some kind of explanation, because that's what we do, is we discuss the legal weekly news. We are also going to talk about the ERA and how it's relating to Biden, what he's trying to do, and is it legal? We're going to talk about the Jack Smith report. Despite him closing out the cases against Donald Trump, the two federal cases, he has now submitted a report which has been released. We're going to talk about that report, how it was released, and what it means. We are also going to talk about the upcoming inauguration, as well as Biden's farewell address. So what gives us the right to do this? You've got two attorneys joining with you and an expert in the Constitution, constitutional law, and the amending process. So among the three of us, we are going to attempt to give you a little bit of a cut above your normal information from the news about how all of this works legally. I'm Virginia Tarani. I've been practicing for over 19 years as a prosecutor, a defense attorney, currently a civil litigator, and I have founded and am operating Tarani Law LLC based in Maryland, which also does cases in Virginia and DC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. And I am joined by my colleague, both in The Law Unscripted, which is our company supporting the Legal Weekly Wine, and in Tarani Law, Chelsea Rogers. Good to have you as our other attorney here.
I'm glad to be here. We have lots of fun stuff to talk about today.
We do. We really do. There's more. Normally, we've been trying to go into subject by subject, but this week has gotten a little out of control, and we're going to do a longer one. So everyone, stay tuned if you don't hear your topic at first, or, skip to another chapter within the podcast and the YouTube video so that you can get to the topic or topics you would like to hear. But we think this one's important to cover a little bit of everything. And that
kicking
leads
off
us
2025 with all of the topics.
Oh my gosh, it is truly the third week in January, and we've got more topics than we've had in even a week in some of the end of December. So we're starting our 2025 off with a bang. And with our expert in con law and the Constitution, Dr. John Weil, who is the Dean of the Honors College at Middle Tennessee State University, and who has been lecturing and writing and teaching about all of these subjects for more years than he'd care for me to say online. Welcome.
Thank you. And by the way, ma'am, for people who are interested in last week's.
Yes, please.
The Tennessean finally posted my piece. They did it under a different headline, but it's Trump's thirst for Greenland and Panama Canal won't get him on Mount Rushmore.
I actually read the article
just today by the Tennessean.
Fantastic. Well, congrats for getting the article published. And those of you who want to read it, it should be fairly accessible on the internet. So search under the Tennessean, which is Nashville, Tennessee's main newspaper, and probably the biggest newspaper and most professional in Tennessee. So check that out, and Dr. Weil can talk to us a little bit more about it. We also, in mentioning last week's episode, that was about Greenland and the Panama Canal, and whether it's legal and constitutionally based, which is our original law, right? As to whether we can take those territories, and if so, how, and if not, why. So catch that one on the YouTube channel. We're putting a link up in the picture so you can see it. We're also going to put a link to that for YouTube and for the audio podcasting in our description below our podcast. So check that out. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with our wine, because we are going to do the WINE portion of it. We've got Dr. Weil, who always succeeds in the Pepsi. He's got his caffeine for today. And my can is all crunched, but I also, in addition to the wine, brought some Coke Zero, cherry Coke Zero with me to keep myself up a little longer today, as well as some wine. I've got the Bartenura Moscato d'Asti again. I've got this back. It is truly one of my favorite wines. And when I keep going into my wine fridge, this keeps coming up because I have about 8 of them. So I'm drinking it again. It's the new year. I'm drinking what I like. It's delightful, beautiful yellow color, a little bit sweeter, but not too sweet. It is a Moscato after all. Chelsea, what are you drinking?
I also have 2 beverages today. We're on the same brainwave. I have first my sweet tea. I'm down here in the South, had to have a glass of sweet tea.
There is no other kind in Atlanta, to my knowledge.
Exactly.
No, I take that back. I have sometimes had peach-flavored tea.
I was going to say, You get a little peach in it. So good. You can split it with lemonade, do a nice little Arnold Palmer situation. Delicious. Yep. But I also have my wine, and this is, as a shock to no one, Franzia box wine.
No.
Chillable red. Here's where we are. Right. Shocking.
I'm telling you, whoever can contact Franzia for us, we'd love to have a sponsor. Chelsea is clearly a big fan. It is very good wine. It's very tasty. So, we're happy to have a sponsor. Exactly. Get us out there. Don't forget, speaking of which, like and subscribe to our channel while you're watching and listening, and make a comment. We have been getting a couple of comments, and again, we don't mind them. I'm glad that they've been respectful. I'm trying to respond as quickly as I can, so stay tuned for that. But let's get into it. I think, goodness, there are so many things to talk about, but I think the biggest topic that most people are interested in is the TikTok decision. So we're going to hit that first in case people want to drop off after that. We hope you don't, but just in case. So it is January 17th while we are taping. And it is this same day that the Supreme Court decision has come out. So we have done our darndest to actually read it and get it for you. Dr. Weil has it printed off. I actually have it printed off. I think Dr. Weil's read it more in depth than I have. Chelsea's got some background info and the latest in reality.
It online. Why are we printing off? Why are we printing things off?
Chelsea, you were too young. Dr. Weil and I do it old school. I've got to I try to do my law office as much virtual as I can. And we have, Chelsea, we have legal software that we end up typing into, and it's in the secured and in the cloud, allegedly. But when it comes to reading something, I got to have it in my hand. I write on it. I highlight, me and my highlighters.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel that for a lot of things. Like, I still have never gotten on the e-reader kick. I can't get into it. I love just a old-fashioned novel. I want to hold it in my hand. But for so many things, like especially with law school, I was like, I can't print all of this. So I got really used to reading cases online.
That's funny. And I mean, Dr. Weil, I took your classes. And I am still we had actual textbooks. I see, when people actually had books, we bought them, we looked at them, we wrote in them and highlighted them.
There's a reason that you have a background behind me. And that is so that people do not see how many books and papers I have in this office and in the one next to it and in the 2 at home.
That's right. You do have
living room at home.
A lot of books.
Yes.
We have always and continuously been joking that the most likely way that you would die is for your books to,
book avalanche or paper slide. Yep.
Exactly. And we'll find you at least happily at your desk and, dying with a smile on your face that you've been surrounded by your books and papers. So we know you have it. All right. So this TikTok case, the technical name and the parties, it's TikTok Inc. and others. It's called et al. Is the legal language. So TikTok, along with some of its subsidiaries, are the original plaintiffs who sued Merrick Garland, the Attorney General for the United States at the time. And then we have additional plaintiffs, starting with Brian Fireball et al., so with others. And these are TikTok users who also joined in to sue Merrick Garland, Attorney General. Dr. Weil, I'm going to start with something. Why are they suing the Attorney General? What does that mean? I mean, it seems odd, right? Can't you sue the U.S.? Congress? Why is it Merrick Garland?
And it's a question you didn't pose earlier, so I'm not positive that I know, but I'll give it a hazard. I mean, the Attorney General is the top law enforcement person in the country. He's acting under the authority of the president. So he is enforcing a law that Congress adopted about a year ago, which said that if what's it called?
It is bite
Right.
time. Oh goodness, ByteDance.
ByteDance, right. If ByteDance did not sell TikTok, which is ByteDance is owned by China, and China has the right under the contract with them to gather information from the TikTok users.
Yeah.
So the law basically says if TikTok doesn't, if they don't divest themselves of TikTok, then they lose the right to be able to operate it within the United States.
So we've got a law passed by Congress, both
and
parts.
bipartisan, fairly overwhelming vote. And to be clear, it did not. It's a little tricky. It did not per se say TikTok couldn't be here. It said they had to divest. It could not be owned by a foreign adversary of the United States or somebody with a connection to them. So they've had a year to sell. I don't know that they've had any bites or not.
There have been, Chelsea will probably know more than I would, but there have been musings on newscasts that Elon Musk was going to buy it. There have, I don't know, Chelsea, what's the latest propaganda on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think everyone talked a lot about maybe Elon buying it, maybe Trump himself buying it. I don't really like either of those options.
Yeah. So, Dr. Weil, can Donald Trump actually buy TikTok when he's about to be president? Is that permissible? Ooh, very long silence.
I don't know.
Okay.
Truthfully, Trump's financial activities have been more closely entwined with the presidency than any prior president that I can think of. In fact, we just commemorated, had the funeral for Jimmy Carter. He actually he had to sell his farm at the end of his presidency because he had put it in trust and they had not done a very good job with it. But, he had completely divested himself of any interest. Trump, as we know, he has a lot of his events. He stays a lot of times at his own places. The fees there are much higher than they would be at a Holiday Inn or a Motel 6. And, it seems that foreign governments, perhaps to curry favor, are sometimes scheduling events at places where he will make money.
Right.
So, to say nothing of the stocks that he owns and the like. So,
and even that,
this law, as I understand it, would not prohibit him from doing that.
But it's odd because originally, right, when he was first president, he had to entrust his companies, his Trump holdings, over to his children. And that's why they were engaged.
Did he have to or did he choose to? I'm not sure.
Well, that is a great question.
I should know that, but I don't. But I do know that there continue to be a lot of questions. I mean, there were questions as to whether the money for his campaign was going into his legal expenses,
right?
Not all of which were connected directly with the government. So I'm not sure. I don't think that he's expected to buy this. If Musk did, it might have much the same effect. I'm assuming that I'm assuming but don't know, that if it were a company within the United States, that Congress could enact further laws restricting the amount of information that would be permissible to either gather or share regarding the users.
Sure.
One fascinating things if you read this case is how many people are involved. There's something like there's 170 million users within the United States,
right?
More than 1 billion worldwide. So if you think about it that way, you still got 800 million or so but 5.5 billion views in a year, and no videos, and 13 trillion views in a year.
And
so the
Chelsea
amount
and
of
I are some of
information,
those.
yeah, I mean it's like 1984 squared in terms of the potential for gathering information.
Here's my problem. I would believe that, right? I would believe that if we were banning apps like Shein and Temu, who are also held, they're not American companies. You divulge a lot of data when you agree to
Right.
shop on these sites. And Meta, are we joking? We're going to say Meta is okay. And so I just think this is
Well,
like,
I'm not all that conversant with this social media scene,
yeah.
but I don't think they're controlled by one of our adversaries. And there's the
Well,
problem
but
here is that TikTok, if you had to pull out American, other than Iran,
right.
South Korea, North
Yeah.
Korea, it
Russia.
would be
Yeah.
China and Russia. And particularly, which, I mean, my understanding, right? China limits TikTok or bans it within their
Yeah,
own
China
country.
does not have TikTok at all.
Yeah.
They won't
So
let
I
their
think
own
it's kind of
citizens
funny.
use it.
I know. And I get very frustrated with this because I think people should get to choose to do what they want to do. Call me crazy. But I just don't buy it. We use foreign apps all the time. Like that to me seems so targeted. And I don't really buy the argument that it's okay for Meta, or an American owned company, to spy on us, but it's not okay if it's an adversary. Like I just don't really buy it. And I don't think a lot of people do either.
Well, the adversary
That's
has nuclear
interesting.
weapons that these
Well,
other companies don't. I mean, that would be one difference.
That it's the
sure.
actual government. But
Yeah.
Chelsea, I appreciate your point, especially about Temu and these other apps that
Yeah.
are selling clothes and selling items directly from China. And I guess the question is, which ones are actually owned by China versus which ones are owned by Chinese companies? Because,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
we've got Nintendo is Japanese. Right? It's a Japanese company, but it's not necessarily owned by the Japanese government. And even then, the question is, would they be considered an adversary? I don't think
Right.
so. So I think the big issue is China and national security, which is what the U.S. government has been arguing.
and
But
that's basically the opinion.
yeah.
The argument is that this is a suppression of freedom of speech, and it sounds like it, right? I mean, you
It
got
does.
170 million people who have a platform that they're now presumably after Sunday not going to be able to use anymore. But the Supreme Court says it doesn't have anything to do with the content. They're not selecting, this speech as opposed to that. This is basically a congressional determination that this is adverse to the national security of the United States, and as such, it's permissible.
Yes, which I think the sort of response to this has been a little funny. For me, I think it's funny. There's an app called Red Note, but it's really called the Little Red Book, which is absolutely a Chinese app, and controlled and very limited. A couple of users have gotten kicked off because they don't understand you can't just post whatever you want on there. So I've seen videos still posted on TikTok of people who joined the Little Red Book and posted whatever they thought they wanted to, and have already violated the terms of service.
Interesting.
But that has been the number one app in America in the App Store for 3 or 4 days at this point, because people are doing it as a kind of a protest move. And I do think it's kind of funny. I think it's a little funny.
It is. And Dr. Viles'
They
point,
said if we're worried about the Chinese government stealing our data, we'll just give it to them, which is hysterical move.
The problem is, as I understand it, if from reading the case, is that in some cases, if you've given permission for your data is entwined with that of other people.
oh,
And
sure.
many times, anybody who's communicated with you is also then swept in under that. So whatever right you might have as an individual, in this case, could end up affecting the whole nation.
Right.
Interestingly, this opinion I thought you were going to ask me what per curiam meant.
That
ask you, and we get to ask Chelsea instead.
That's right, but so you jumped into the decision before we'd gotten there.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No. So it is, in speaking of the decision, it is technically what's called in legal terms, Latin terms, per curiam. So there is not majority. It usually says something to the effect of majority opinion, comma, and then it gives the name of the justice writing. That's not here. So Dr. Weil, what does it mean?
Well, a curia is a group, like the papal curia. So this is a decision, an unsigned decision written by the court. Now we do have two people. We have a concurring opinion by Justice Sotomayor on a fairly technical matter, and then we have an interesting decision by Justice Gorsuch, I believe it. Yeah, Gorsuch.
Yes.
Who basically is expressing exasperation over how quickly this case came to the court.
Where it's still a concurring
got it within a
opinion.
week or two, right? And they had to make the time where this is supposed to end, I believe, is Sunday.
Yes,
and so if they were to have any input, and as far as I can tell, as some of our viewers will know, as I understand it, Trump intervened, I guess, as amicus curiae. I'm not sure about that, but he intervened, basically saying he would like the court to wait until he became president and could decide on this. There's no mention that I could see in this 30-page opinion or so where they address that. So his effort there, yeah.
But let's talk about where they do mention Trump. And I think a lot of people will be surprised at this.
Okay.
Not to make, a decision or a comment one way or the other, except that Trump does have involvement, right? We've got the amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief,
right,
where he is trying to insert and make this request. But this technically started from Trump's administration. At his request in 2020. Yes. And I don't think people remember or know this. And there are some, I don't know if he's even remembering himself or if he's trying to say it didn't happen. But the way they've discussed the background of the case is that it began, and they specifically say in August of 2020, during the Trump administration, over national security concerns. And he issued an executive order, which presidents love to do, right? This is an executive order concerning the spread of companies owned by China and that it threatens national security, foreign policy, and the U.S. economy. And at that time, he invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the National Emergency Act to make this order prohibiting transactions involving ByteDance, this same company that's involved in both cases now, and its subsidiaries. And he also ordered ByteDance to divest its interests and rights and property enabling or supporting ByteDance's operation of TikTok in the U.S.
Right.
So it was originally his request.
And then a congressional law. And I think his original one was denied, right? Or there were questions raised as to whether he had authority.
Correct.
And then again, and it's a bipartisan measure. And the one other thing we haven't mentioned is, my understanding is Biden is the last day in office, full day is his Sunday. Mm-hmm. And Biden has said he's not going to enforce this. He's going to leave the enforcement to Trump. Right. Which will be the next, presumably the next day. And there is some question as, does the president, I think the answer is no, but does he have any authority after this decision to say, well, I'm going to give him another X days? I think my understanding is they had up to, is it 90 or 120 days?
90.
Yeah, 90 days that they could extend it, but I think that had to be done by
within a timeline.
The 20th, I believe, or 19th.
I thought it had to be, my understanding was that it had to go into effect before it actually took place.
The 19th,
before the
I think,
ban
is the
took
last
place.
day. So Trump won't be in office until the afternoon of the 20th. So
right.
I don't know what that will.
So let's talk about some separation of powers.
Okay.
And this is where we're headed back to our original code, right? Our original law is the founding fathers set us up with a 3-part system of checks and balances where they were supposed to be equal parts and checks on the other parts. We now have Congress as one part making a law, passing it. Dr. Vile, as
Power
you
of the
said,
purse.
power of the purse. They have made a law which has been signed by the president. And the Supreme Court, the second branch of government, another branch of government, equal branch, has now ruled that the law is constitutional and does not violate the First Amendment based upon the security concerns that are also being weighed against it. Dr. Vile, you're mentioning this, but what happens if Donald Trump takes office on Monday and says, here's executive order number whatever, whatever, now I'm going to say you can't enforce or use this
he
rule?
probably wouldn't do it by executive order. He probably would just announce that he hasn't. I mean, if he wanted to, he could announce that, there's so many laws and this is not a priority for him. But companies would be taking a chance to proceed. I mean, that's sort of slim authority. I don't know if they're, the only reason I could see an executive order in this case would be if it were the opposite. If the court were saying it's okay and he were to come in and say, no, as commander in chief, I think it's a national security concern, so I'm going to suspend it for that reason. I don't know a similar reason that would enable him not to enforce this law.
But what about people who are saying, well, he's another equal branch of government. Only two have ruled on it. Why can't he overrule these other decisions?
Well, he had a chance to veto the law when it was adopted.
But was it adopted during his
if
administration
he did,
or Biden's?
Well, I'm a little confused because we had talked about how the origin goes back to his administration. But
right.
When Congress adopted this law,
which I think was
the president
recently,
had a chance to veto it, and they could have overridden that veto by a 2/3 majority of both houses, which they chose not to do.
In effect, the third part of government, the third branch, the executive branch, also signed it into order, even though it's wasn't
actually
him.
The second branch.
Well, the third branch that I've discussed,
legislative, executive, judicial, in terms of it, and they're not quite equal. Under the original scheme, congressional branch was thought to be the most powerful. Today, in practice, it's probably the presidential branch.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of concern that there was an article, and I don't know that I copied it for today's broadcast, but there was a very fascinating article in either the Times or the Post today, arguing that the president is increasingly encroaching on the power of the purse, and that and also that Congress, I believe the words that were used was it was increasingly supine in terms of just sort of rolling over and saying, well, let the president do what he wants.
Well, there was even talk recently about Congress giving away some of the power of the purse to the presidency.
Well, in my judgment, they
can't.
I mean, they cannot do their job, but in my judgment, they have a constitutional mandate to adopt laws. And I don't know how without changing the Constitution one can get around that. But notice, okay, by per curiam, I don't know that they are always unanimous, but essentially there are no dissents. There are two concurrences. But everybody, all the members of the court, and again, remember, this is a free speech case, and free speech case, and there's considerable discussion here, which will interest only law professors and advanced law students about what level of scrutiny should be given here, whether it's intermediate scrutiny or strict scrutiny. But there seems to be a consensus that whatever scrutiny you gave to a law, if you're not discriminating on the basis of the content, you're not picking and choosing, and you have national security, that the last branch of government that should be intervening is the judicial branch, which knows the least about national security matters.
Right. It's hard to think of a greater reason a more important reason that if you're going to suppress speech, then that would be it.
There is one really fascinating aspect of this case that most people probably are going to miss.
I love the excitement in your voice,
And I
Dr.
don't
Vile.
believe it comes out to Gorsuch's opinion, because the per curiam opinion doesn't mention it. But apparently, the U.S. presented top secret evidence for the court to bolster its case. And Gorsuch says, we didn't look at it and we shouldn't look at it. It's not fair for the government to offer evidence that only one side can see.
Oh, my goodness.
And it reminds me a little bit of the Korematsu case, if you remember, which involved the internment of Japanese Americans. We now know that the evidence, and I don't know that it was top secret, but the evidence that the government presented was biased evidence. They left out a lot of, there was plenty of evidence to show that very few Japanese Americans were allied with Japan in the attack. And they suppressed that evidence. So it's, again, now it's like, I'd sure like to know what that extra top secret information is. But if I understand Gorsuch, they didn't look at it.
Wow.
And, it would be tough, yes, to be a defense attorney or a plaintiff's attorney. And you say, we think this violates freedom of speech. And the other side says, well, it doesn't, but there are reasons we can't tell you. We can only show to the court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
want to be an attorney in that circumstance.
Tough. Goodness. Okay, so that's what's happening with TikTok. Now, let me ask a final question, and I'm going to ask this to Chelsea.
Oh, God.
What are the responsibilities, if any, of U.S. citizens regarding this order as of Sunday? What do you think happens? What do we do?
So this is interesting. I've been talking about this because originally, this is forever ago, they said that the app would just slowly stop to work because you wouldn't be able to update it. You wouldn't be able to do anything. But now they're saying it's going to go black. It's just going to disappear. Which makes me mad, honestly. I love TikTok. I feel like I learn so much from TikTok. I follow people who are so smart and talk about the books they've written, are so fascinating.
I love what's her Lawyer Paige. She's my favorite.
Lawyer Paige is so good. Reb Maisel, learning about a whole bunch of things, like people who used to be Amish and aren't. I went down a whole rabbit hole with that I only got to see their life experience because of TikTok, right? I think it was this really great app, and I'm very sad to see it go. I have not made my decision whether or not I'm going to get on the little red book. I don't know yet.
So Chelsea, don't take this the wrong way.
Yeah.
No.
But I think most people use TikTok for entertainment rather than education. Sure. And you remind me a little bit of the people who used to claim to get Playboy to read the interviews and the articles rather than look at the pictures. So.
Look, there are a lot of cute
obviously
dog
there's
videos.
Entertainment. There's entertainment too, for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm going to be sad to see it go. I'm debating whether or not I'm going to get the little red book. We'll see. Maybe I need to, go outside and touch grass and not be on another app.
I like that idea, and honestly, it's to me. I'm not as upset. I'm on TikTok, and our company's on. The Law Unscripted is on TikTok, and our Tarani Law is on TikTok. But in my mind, it's like, okay, well, I'll use YouTube. Yeah. I'll use Facebook Reels or Instagram Reels. It's like, okay. I mean, I'm sad of all the things that I'm losing from TikTok and the videos I saved and, the people I follow. But almost everyone who is on there that I follow are saying, okay, if TikTok goes black, here's where you can find me. You can find me on this. A lot of the people that I already follow on TikTok, I'm finding on Facebook. Now, I'm an old person because I'm using Facebook, and I don't care. I like it. And I find a lot of good things on there. So I think, in my mind, it shouldn't be so difficult. And this is not a legal opinion. This is my own personal issue, is there are other platforms that are already out there, especially for video content. So just use those. But that's what I'll be doing.
You're using Facebook, and I'm still using a quill pen.
Look, I think it's time for MySpace to make a comeback. That's what I'm rooting for.
That's right. I love it. All right.
No,
go for it, Chelsea.
The only thing that makes me sad about the difference between Instagram Reels or Facebook Reels or whatever, or even YouTube Shorts, the only app that was primarily focused on short form video content, and that was the entire basis of the app, was TikTok.
Sure.
The other one sort of adapted. And so it just doesn't feel the same. So I'm going to pout about it. But what can I do? What can I do?
Yeah. So each of us has a
Country is
decision
safer.
to make.
Maybe.
Is it though?
Maybe.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll
if somebody
see.
buys TikTok, we might change our mind.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay, so with that, let's talk about some safety concerns as well, but in a different way. Jack Smith's report on Trump's cases was revealed.
Monumental, too.
And it does seem so. Now here's where I want to break it down with safety and confidentiality issues. As an attorney, I got to say, I was, on Trump's side in this. And that's shocking for me to say. But, at least politically speaking. But legally, I was like, but the case didn't go forward, right? There is no public forum that these documents or this information would have been produced except through trial and through court record had the cases proceeded. So in my mind, as an attorney looking at this, saying if the cases were closed and concluded for whatever reason, then the evidence did not have a proper place and time to come out publicly and should therefore be confidential.
On the other hand, the United States spent millions and millions of dollars on these cases, and they would have proceeded to trial had they not been delayed by the defendant.
But does that authorize the production of these documents?
Well, I think he gets off pretty lightly. He's accused of some very, there are evidence gathered here for some very serious offenses. If I may read specific charges.
Yes, please.
Conspiring to obstruct the government function of selecting and certifying the president. Obstructing and attempting to obstruct the official proceedings on January 6th. Conspiring to obstruct official proceedings in violation of U.S. Code 18 and conspiring to violate the federal rights of citizens to vote and have their votes counted. They're pretty serious charges.
And these are the ones, the D.C. charges that were brought.
Right. Now, there are 2 volumes of this report, and we only have the first volume. And we have it, by the way, courtesy in some ways of Aileen Cannon, who's often thought to be sort of a shill for Trump.
Well, she was the Florida judge who shut down the entire documents case.
But so she ruled that he did. Trump went to court to stop this, and she ruled that since it only involved the only people officially named by name were Trump, that we had the right to that evidence, but that we didn't have the right to the evidence for the documents case because there are still ongoing proceedings against co-conspirator or alleged co-conspirators.
Other defendants.
And so we have half the report. Now, what's fascinating, most fascinating, I think, about Jack Smith's, and I have a bias here because, I contribute regularly to our First Amendment online encyclopedia. But what's fascinating is he goes at some length in what charges he didn't bring. And he did not bring a charge under the Insurrection Act, and he did not charge Trump with incitement. And as we both know, all of us know, 1969, the Brandenburg versus Ohio case, although most speech is protected, speech that results in an imminent threat or a threat of imminent lawless action is not necessarily protected by the First Amendment. And we know that the day of the riot, and by the way, there's a long discussion in here as to whether it was a riot or whether it was an insurrection. Sure. And that's part of the problem in him explaining why he didn't do it under the Insurrection Act. And the more interesting argument, which I don't remember seeing before, although maybe I just missed it, he claims that an insurrection is something against an existing government, and Trump was the existing government on January the 6th.
Oh, interesting.
And
So it
so
was in favor of the existing government rather than against it.
right. And so, I mean, it's bizarre because I would distinguish between the government and the occupant of a particular branch of government at the time. But he's trying to explain why he didn't go there. That the bar for showing incitement to imminent lawless action is a very high bar. And according to him, we've never had, as I understand it, we've never really had a successful prosecution under the Insurrection Act. And so, and I can remember times actually, it's a little bit different, but during the riots that occurred in St. Louis, I guess it was, there were people who got up and said things that led to buildings being burned. And
Right.
when they weren't prosecuted, it was like, this is just dead letter. If you're not going to prosecute somebody, and I understand they were upset and all the rest, but that doesn't give you the right to try to burn somebody's place down.
Right.
So he basically says, I mean, I think the implication is we came very close to a president who did try to incite insurrection, but he says he thinks he could have won the 4 charges that I outlined. He wasn't sure. He thought it would muck it up to bring in the incitement and the insurrection charges, and so he decided not to do so.
Interesting. I think, legally speaking, it would be easier to prove such an issue civilly rather than criminally because of the different standards of proof. With the criminal action, it would be beyond a reasonable doubt, and you would have to define the terms and agree beyond a reasonable doubt as to the definition of the terms first, and then if that was committed. Whereas civilly, it's the more likely than not standard, just a little bit more than half.
On the other hand, aren't conspiracies a little bit easier if you have evidence than direct action sometimes to prove?
Absolutely. In both civil and criminal.
Yeah.
Certainly you would have to find the right law civilly. And ultimately, there have been several lawsuits that have been brought civilly against Trump, including wrongful death cases brought by the estates of the fallen officers or the officers who died afterwards. There's a lot of debate as to whether they should, because some of them, or at least one, died by suicide afterwards. One perished later. They weren't necessarily at the time. But there will be definitions. It is a wrongful death. Did Donald Trump's words or his actions contribute to the ultimate death? Did they lead to, were they part of the reason for the death, the, proximate and actual cause? And I'm not going to ask Chelsea the difference between proximate and actual cause, am I?
No, because anyone who knows and has followed along with our bar series, for some reason, that concept, I could not make sense of it. Could not make sense. I was like, hey, Virginia, I know we do negligence every single day in the law practice, but I do not understand causation.
Yeah, it is really funny. And those of you in law school and studying for the bar, do check out our bar series with the Law Unscripted. We do a full entire series on the 8 core subjects of the bar, including, torts with the negligence. And I think you'll have some funny times with the video reviews where Chelsea and I work out where she was studying for the bar and what questions she had. So maybe you two have the same questions and you can check it out. But yeah, go ahead, Dr. Weil.
Well, let me add something here that, this case, basically Trump is off the hook for this. Now, what'll be very fascinating is there are a lot of people in jail today who are expecting to be out on the 20th.
By pardon.
And by pardon. And unfortunately, in my judgment, Biden has somewhat greased the skids by pardoning his own son.
And how many people in the last few weeks of his presidency?
Mostly low-level drug, right? Not users rather
but
than
still thousands.
Yeah. And death penalty. He's commuted death penalty because he doesn't believe in that. But the expectation of most of these people is that they're going to be pardoned. The people that have been convicted from January 6th. But if you'll notice, J.D. Vance is among those who has said, I don't think we ought to pardon those who physically attack police officers. And there were a good number of people
Right. The violence
Apparently who
part
were
of it.
involved, they were using flagpoles and bear spray and
Yes.
all kinds of things, to attack the police. So it'll be very, that will be, I don't know. I mean, I think Trump supporters are all, if they're in jail, they're expecting a pardon. And I think some of them may end up being disappointed.
Right.
And I'm going to be disappointed if they all get commutations because, particularly if they attack law enforcement, I just think that's beyond the pale.
It's hard for me as a former prosecutor and former criminal defense attorney to think of people being pardoned for violent offenses.
Yeah.
And even in Maryland, the law in Maryland is very different than in Virginia. And for juveniles, and I swear this relates, for juveniles, Maryland in the past few years has gone to no jail time for juveniles. That it has to be, the juveniles have to be charged as adults for jail time to be provided or given. They also have to have a non-technical violation of an order or of probation in order for jail time to be considered. And I've been one of the few in Maryland who, having some personal experience with this, is shocked that there's no exception for violent juvenile offenders. There are so many gangs in this area. And the gangs, there's a huge problem right now across Maryland and D.C. even of juvenile gang members carjacking. Grand theft auto and carjacking, and the violent carjacking, that's taking a car by force. And they pick them up and they release them because they're juveniles.
So, did we discuss last week the 4 factors? I won't be able to remember them now. The 4 factors that make deaths in America much lower or much higher.
We did in church, but not. We did in church, but not on the podcast.
Okay, so they were guns, obesity, which is not related to this,
suicide,
car deaths,
and suicide, right?
Drugs.
Oh no, it was drugs instead of suicide. Yes.
Yeah. They were the 4 reasons that. And, I watch news usually from Nashville almost every night. Rarely a night that there's not a juvenile involved in a shooting or a death by guns. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Okay, so that'll wrap up Jack Smith. Let's talk about the ERA, or do you want to save that to the end, Dr. Vile?
We can talk about it. I mean, it's not going to take very long.
Okay. What is the ERA, and why would anybody care about it? Well, what's the interest in this?
It's a proposed amendment that would give equal rights to people, no matter what their gender. It was proposed 85. I'm using, by the way, I have an encyclopedia of constitutional amendments, which is now in its 5th edition, and I've been following this for some time. But the short of it is, the Equal Rights Amendment, the proposals go back to about the 1920s. Republican platform for many years advanced the Equal Rights Amendment pretty much up to Reagan, and then Republicans began to pull back, partly out of fear that Equal Rights Amendment would affect abortion, that it would sanction abortion.
Sure.
But as often happens, it was proposed with a 7-year time limit. Which expired, let me see. I don't remember. Well, yeah.
It's expired.
I think it expired, so it must have been 1972 or so that it was proposed. It was proposed, most recent amendments will have a clause that says, a self-enforcing clause that says, to be valid, this must be adopted in 7 years. Mm-hmm. So people looked at that, people like me, and said, it's sort of gunking up the Constitution. Every time you're reading the amendment, why do you need to read this?
Right.
So somebody said, well, we'll just put it in the authorizing resolution. Congress adopts it. They say it has to be adopted in 7 years. 35 states or so immediately adopted it, first year or two. And then Phyllis Schlafly got on the warpath and began to suggest that the amendment might require unisex bathrooms, raised a whole slew of objections to it, including objections that it might make it easier for abortion, which she was opposed to. And so 7 years were up. Amendment wasn't adopted. People thought it was dead. Somebody in Congress said, well, it was only in the authorizing resolution. We'll adopt a new authorizing resolution. And they extended it for 3 more years. And then it didn't get wasn't adopted. But a few states, some states began rescinding or trying to rescind their ratifications. But in the meantime, other states have one by one, and I think Virginia was the one who finally got it up to 38.
Right.
They said, well, we're going to ratify it anyway. So if you don't count the rescissions and you do count the ratifications that have occurred since the 2 extensions were left, you now have enough, and we did 2 or 3 years ago, that the amendment should go into effect. Constitution doesn't say when amendments go into effect.
Right.
There is a classic Supreme Court, there are 2, Coleman versus Miller, which says it's a political question, meaning we're going to stay out of it. But then there's another, Dillon versus Gloss, and I think it actually came first, which said to be valid, amendments need to meet the contemporary consensus standard. In other words, it doesn't make sense. Imagine we had a law on horse thievery that was proposed back in 1789, and we suddenly added 3 more votes, and suddenly we have a new horse thievery law.
Sure.
That, we would say that, a lot has changed since 1789 and today. So the consensus is that the amendment is dead, but it does technically, if you don't count the rescissions, and the Supreme Court has never made a decision on this officially, if you don't count the rescissions, you have the 38 states that are necessary. So Biden says, I think it's adopted. But there's a Supreme Court decision, 1798, Hollingsworth versus Virginia.
It's taking us back a very long way.
Okay, but it's a very early one. And the question was, does a president need to sign an amendment before it becomes adopted?
Oh, interesting.
They have to sign other laws, but
Congress
Article
enacted
5
an amendment.
doesn't say anything about the president. So the president can say what he wants, but that's not going to make it law. Now, in the case of the 27th Amendment, which was proposed in 1789 and adopted 200 and some years later, it didn't have a timeline either in the amendment or in the resolution accompanying it.
And just so we're clear for everybody out there, what is the
27th Amendment
27th?
basically says Congress can't give itself a pay raise without an intervening election. That amendment was later certified. There was never a rescission. States continued over a 200-year period to add their votes. And a student of political science, Gregory Watson, down at University of Texas, took it upon himself and spent $5,000 or so to get the other states to ratify. And the National Archivist, who is not mentioned in the Constitution, said, you're right, this is an official amendment. So,
Amazing.
and to date, the Archivist has refused to do this. And frankly, Biden is wrong here, and here's why. Even if you thought that we had this consensus and this were right, would it be fair for someone who has who has not been reelected, his opponent is coming into office, the majorities in at least one house will shift when this happens? Would it be fair for an outgoing president to declare a consensus, and particularly now with the Dobbs decision, right, which has overturned Roe versus Wade, if this does have implications for abortion, whichever side you're on, it would not be democratic for an outgoing president to make the decision on behalf of a new administration.
Sure.
So I mean, I think his heart's probably in the right place. Most of us, I hope, favor equal rights for women. But is this a way to treat a constitution? What if, one president says, well, I think it's in, the next one says, I think it's out. The cleanest way to do this is, if there is in fact a consensus for an equal rights amendment, reintroduce it in Congress and have it readopted.
Interesting.
Give the states another chance. By the way, one of my favorite titles, and I have to give credit to Brannon Denning, who is a professor of law at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. We wrote an article called Necromancing the Equal Rights Amendment. And it was basically, this was many years ago now, Tulane Law Review, if I remember, basically had to do with, can you resurrect an amendment when the time is over for it? And our conclusion was, no, that's really not fair. And, think about it. There are a lot of amendments that could be proposed by the other side in the next couple of years.
True.
And, you want to make sure that it's not just not that this would exactly be a flash in the pan since it's been out there for 100 years in terms of discussion, but, there are cleaner ways to adopt amendments than that.
All right.
Anyway.
So with his alleged adoption of the amendment, President Biden also had a farewell address in addition to farewell executive orders and farewell pardons. His actual address, Chelsea, did you watch it?
Oh, I muted myself. I'm so sorry. No, I did not. I did not watch it. I saw a couple clips of it. I was not all that enthused or entertained or interested in watching it, to be perfectly honest.
I got to say the same. I also did not watch it.
That's terrible. I just didn't really care.
It didn't last that long. It's only about 20 minutes, much to my chagrin. I was hoping it would be longer. You may know that I am writing a book. In fact, I've written a book. I just need somebody to publish it. Hint, hint, if anybody's watching. So farewell addresses, and give you a little bit of history lesson. Only 3 prior to Truman. You want to guess who they were? There's one that everybody learns in school. Most famous farewell address. It's read in Congress once every year.
Really? Still?
Yes.
Okay, can we have another hint? Can we have one more hint?
Well, it came early.
It would not have been Lincoln or Franklin Roosevelt because they died and didn't have a chance to do one.
That's right.
Is it Washington?
Yes. Oh. George Washington's farewell address.
Good for you, Chelsea.
Which is primarily known for what? What warning? Very famous.
Is it?
And the term actually comes from Mr. Jefferson, but the sentiment was there.
I have no idea.
It was basically a warning against entangling foreign alliances.
Oh.
And also it's known for the statement that morality was necessary to the security of a free state. And so we ought to nurture religion and morality.
Interesting.
So he gave the first one. Next, another very powerful president, Andrew Jackson, gave the second one. Andrew Johnson gave the third, and his was everybody will concede that it was an utter disaster. It was basically partisan polemics, was not received well. It was enough to scare all the other presidents off until Harry Truman.
From making a farewell
Truman comes
address.
along. Okay, it's in the Cold War, so it's particularly important. And most presidents since Truman, who lived, and also obviously not Kennedy, but most presidents since then have given farewell addresses, including, by the way, Donald Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Gave a farewell address. And that's what led me to believe, one of the reasons I wrote the book, is the fact that he gave such an address indicated to me that it was becoming sort of an institutional expectation. And what's fascinating about Biden is that he really has he has 2 farewell addresses, in a sense, because he gave a short speech explaining, you remember just a couple months back,
why
about
he
Kamala
was turning
down the nomination that he had earned. And And, at that time, he basically, used language to, sort of I want to leave on good terms. I care about the office more than I do about myself. I'm giving up because I think it's right for the country. And what's fascinating about this, I mentioned that there are two farewell addresses that I think stand out from all the others. One is Washington's, and the other, and I'm going to give you a term and then you tell me the president, okay? Military industrial complex.
Theodore Roosevelt.
No.
Oh.
Hold on.
It was a warning against.
And this is since Truman.
Yes.
Okay. I apologize.
Since Truman?
First George Bush?
No.
Reagan.
It was ironic
Carter.
in a way. No.
Obama?
No.
Trump?
You don't have many presidents left.
Clinton.
It was Eisenhower.
Oh, back further.
Who,
Okay.
in some ways, epitomized the military-industrial complex.
Right,
He
as a general.
He had been the general during World War II. But what's fascinating is that...
Okay, and we're coming back to Chelsea. Go ahead,
No,
Dr.
okay,
Weil.
I had a conversation about this week, and I should have remembered that. I went down a deep dive on presidents this week.
Good for you.
Well, it started with a JFK documentary, unsurprisingly. And then, it wasn't a documentary, it was a movie. But then I started watching documentaries. So it kind of spiraled. So,
of course. So, Dr. Weil, what's ironic about it, other than that he was the main general in World War II, apart from Patton?
Well, and he had, he had beefed up the American nuclear establishment during his term. But what's fascinating is, so most farewells, you try to establish your own legacy, but it's sort of your last chance at, being listened to by everybody. And so often you'll have warnings, as you did in these two. So you had a warning from Washington against entangling alliances, had the warning from Eisenhower about military-industrial complex, and then you get warnings from Biden, basically, and let's try to use the term, he calls it the tech-industrial complex. And he says he's particularly concerned about actually sort of the TikTok issue, misinformation and disinformation. And that we need to be, and he uses a term which we don't use probably enough. He says that there's been a concentration of power and wealth that he fears has created something of an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a group of rich men who are proceeding in their own interests. And I'm sure he's thinking Elon Musk, Ramaswamy,
yeah.
Right. And, the tech bros, and possibly Trump himself.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting that he's, and he did not refer directly to Trump by name. He used the primary analogy that he uses, usually Biden talks about protecting democracy, and he did talk about it here, but he primarily switched from democracy to liberty. And he used his primary image was that of the Statue of Liberty, and what it stood for. I thought it was he's not a particularly good orator.
Right.
But I thought content-wise, I think it was a pretty good speech.
So for the speeches, it won't go down in the history books. They might not read it every year from Congress.
But the tech, what was the term I just used? The warning against tech industrial complex.
Tech industrial, yeah.
That's and again, I'm sure a lot of it, his party's been defeated by billionaires.
Right.
And of course they had a few of their own in their back pocket. So
of course
it's hard to throw too many stones here. But it's a concern that going all the way back to Aristotle, one of the prime prerequisites for what we would call a democracy or free government was a large middle class. And there are dangers when a few people have access to billions, if not trillions of dollars, And, what can they buy? Can we still say that we're a nation? Do equal votes matter if somebody in effect can buy votes
Buys them.
through advertising, control of the media, or the like? And so in some ways, we're back to the TikTok issue that we dealt with earlier.
Sure. Well, with a farewell begins an inauguration. Yeah. What do we anticipate from the inauguration and the you know what I'm saying? Thank you. The actual speech that Trump will give.
First, if people
it is a long day, everyone.
If people are interested in this topic, I do have a book called The Drama of Presidential Inaugurations and Inaugural Addresses from Washington through to Biden.
Amazing.
And it deals a little, one of the fascinating things about this inauguration is it's going to be indoors, apparently, because it's very cold.
Well, it's supposed to snow another 3 to 5 inches up here on Sunday night.
Well, and I think one of the defining points, actually, the Trump administration occurred within the first Trump administration occurred within the first 2 days, where Trump said, and particularly Conway said, this is the largest crowd we've ever had at an inauguration. And people looked at the pictures and they said, well, it looks like there were more people here for Obama. And she basically says, you have your facts, we have ours. We're not going to worry about the facts. If Trump says it's the largest, it's the largest.
Alternative facts was my favorite phrase for so long. She said what she said was alternative facts.
Yeah,
and that became part of my vernacular for so many years because I thought it was so funny.
No, well, and it wasn't scary, just you. Actually. I mean, from whatever quarter, everybody has the right to their own opinion. But not necessarily to their own facts, right?
Well, I mean, that's like Holocaust deniers.
Well, absolutely, yeah, flat earthers. I mean, we have people like that out there. But nonetheless, I'm assuming with the weather that we're probably not going to have a record crowd. The last inaugural address that Trump gave was probably the blackest that we've had, the
darkest,
most ominous that we've had in American history.
I don't think he's going to be better for positivity.
Well, it was I'm trying to remember what was the term that they used for it. I want to say doom and gloom, but there was actually a technical phrase. Well, the main theme was it's from this day forward, it's going to be America first, only America first.
It was something Carnage, wasn't it?
Oh, that does sound familiar. Carnage.
What they called his speech. It was something American Carnage or something.
Yes,
Carnage.
American Carnage. And in fact, and I don't think I had this in the book because I don't think we knew it then. There are 3 people who have quoted George Bush as saying, what kind of S was this?
Oh, my goodness.
He has not affirmed or denied it. But it just caught people by, it was basically, the country's going to hell in a handbasket because of crime, our education is declining, everybody's taking advantage of us, and it's going to stop.
And now it's, the immigrants. I mean, we've got more things to be declining.
Right. A lot. And we've had a campaign very similar, right? Everybody's taking advantage of us on tariffs. We're not, Europe isn't doing enough to defend themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be very fascinating to see. I hope he doesn't take it in that direction, frankly. I just, usually inaugurations are perceived as occasions for unifying a country.
Yeah.
And Trump also, now what is also distinctive in addition to this American Carnage theme is what's distinctive about Trump in inaugurations that he shares with only 3 other people?
I have no idea.
Okay. So 2 of them, maybe 4. Well, no, he's the 4th. Okay. 2 of them I'm going to give a pass to. John Adams when he lost his election to Mr. Jefferson, they had never been a transfer of power from one party to another.
Mm.
And if I remember, his wife was sick. I could be wrong on that, but he hit it home the night before or the morning of the inauguration.
So he didn't attend it.
I know what it is. He didn't attend. Yeah,
Right.
he didn't attend.
And then later, John Quincy Adams, his son, did the same thing.
Mm.
But again, you had
early.
Yeah, you don't have enough to really say he broke a tradition. But then the next person, if I remember correctly, maybe I'm.
Was it Roosevelt, Teddy?
I want to say that I don't think Andrew Johnson attended, but I could be if he did, it may be that he attended, but they were in the car and they wouldn't talk to one, or in the carriage and they didn't talk to one another. But basically, all the other losing candidates have always shown up. Well, I'm sorry. All the other candidates, ex-presidents, if you were a president and you lost the election, you always showed up for the inauguration of your successor, except for Donald Trump.
Interesting.
And there is some discussion. My understanding is that Michelle Obama, Nancy Pelosi have decided not to attend.
So the question is, will there be the presidents?
Who say I don't blame them.
No.
Why would you? I have a little bit different position, which is norms are important. Even if somebody violates a norm, you don't just call them out. You show them how you should act, how you should act when you lose. And as far as I know, Biden will be there.
I'll be interested to see about Bush and Clinton and Obama.
Well, my understanding is they plan to attend.
Okay.
I was going to say Melania declined to meet with Jill Biden for the custody. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
so they
wow.
They're supposed to have a lunch or a tea.
No, I don't think it's. Oh.
Yeah, for a lunch or a tea, and she declined the invitation.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's the vice president's house, isn't it?
I don't know that.
I think there's. Yeah,
it's definitely a snub.
I don't know the details there, so.
All right.
But it's typically the inaugural address. It's supposed to be a very formal address. It's supposed to be, the probably the best inaugural address in American history was 1801. First transfer of power from Federalist Party to Democratic Republican Party. Each of them, claiming the other is an atheist or a hermaphrodite or all the charges that went back and forth, and they did. And Mr. Jefferson says, we're all Federalists, we're all Democratic Republicans. We may have different political we may have different policies, but we're united on common ideals. And that's usually what you try to do in a presidential address. And frankly, I think Trump's inclination is going to be the other way. Trump's inclination is to get up there and say, I won, we're in charge, and we're going to run the country the way we want. But he didn't win by that much. Right. And he would be wise, and I'd say the same thing if this were Kamala Harris being, the wisest thing to do is to reach out and try to achieve consensus. Neither side has enough that they can adopt most consequential legislation without help from the other side. So don't pour gasoline on the fire. Spread the warmth.
Right.
But
Goodness.
I doubt that I will be listened to on this. But and it's always interesting to see how many people they invite to pray and who they are.
Yes. The singers are already being listed. That's already been controversial.
Yeah. And there's a long discussion. And there was a wonderful article this last week we don't put much attention to it, but the importance of the oath in the Constitution, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and how important that was to the framers. And it goes all the way back. And then so now there's discussion as to, did George Washington say, so help me God? That's not in the official oath. most people think that term probably did not come until the 19th century. But when you said, "So help me God," you were basically saying, if I'm lying, I'm going to hell.
Right.
I mean,
Right. If
people
this
took
is
this
not
very,
true.
very seriously. It's generally believed, although it can't be absolutely proven, and somebody may write to you on this because they've certainly written to me about it. There's a general belief that George Washington may have kissed the Bible.
Oh, interesting.
Instead of saying that was very common at the time, when you took an oath or whatever. And we know that I believe the last president who did that was Harry Truman. I believe I'm right on that. But today, most people probably think that "So help me God" is in the pledge. It's not. And there's only been one president, you know who it is, who didn't swear the oath.
Was it Carter?
No. But it's a good guess.
Thank you.
Is it more recent or less recent than Carter?
No. Obscure.
Oh.
Franklin Pierce.
Oh, that would not have come to my mind at all.
Yeah, he didn't swear, he affirmed. Which is permissible. And, that was
It's even
put in there
permissible in
specifically
court.
for people like Quakers and others who take the scripture literally about not swearing.
Fascinating. All right. Well, with the end comes a beginning, right? So we will be transitioning early next week. We're going to try to get this one out during the weekend rather than waiting till Monday. So hopefully it will be. Don't forget to check out thelawunscripted.com for your merch. Definitely get some merch. We've got some fun legal humor on there with some coffee tumblers and with some shirts.
Do you want me to sign Bibles for
anybody?
Or
Right? Yeah, maybe he should kiss that one. But now we are definitely down at the end here. So get your merch. Check out the law school classes. Especially, we've got the bar coming up again in February. So check out that for any kind of bar review. We even have some hypotheticals that we walk through. So if you want to see how well you might be doing on a hypothetical bar question, check those out. Have some fun with us. We also tried to have some fun with it. We do try to laugh every once in a while, not always at others' expense. And stay tuned for the inauguration. Stay tuned for what happens on TikTok. And we will catch you next week on the Legal Weekly Wine.